Okay, Chapter 11, Flour, Lumber, and Iron. These are our true statements for our true and false portion of our test. So here we go. Number 1, Minnesota's white pine lumber was highly valuable. We were building now, and we needed that lumber. Number 2, the Mesabi, Vermilion, and Cuyuna ranges were all important sources of iron ore up north in the Iron Range. Number 3, Charles Pillsbury was not the first man to start a flour mill in Minneapolis. I know you've heard the name Pillsbury. There were other men that started flour mills. He was not the first one. Number 4, sweepers were paid low wages in the flour milling industry. They were probably the lowest paid workers in the flour milling. It was very dusty with flour all the time, and they went around sweeping. Number 5, Frederick Weyerhaeuser did not influence Minnesota's mining industry. Yeah, he did not. Frederick Weyerhaeuser was in the lumbering business, and you still might see that name Weyerhaeuser when you go to a lumber yard today. Number 6, lumberjacks worked 6 days a week, not 5, but 6. They only had Sundays off to maybe go to church, wash their clothes, or whatever they needed to do. Number 7, waterfalls were important to flour milling and lumbering. Yes, waterfalls is where we got our power. You needed power to run the flour mill, you needed power to run the lumber mills, and waterfalls is where we got it. Had nothing to do with the mining business whatsoever. Our next slide is matching. Industrialists. They are owners and managers of large business. Remember, IST means a person who. A person who owns or manages large businesses. Industrialist. Economy. Every country has an economy. Right now they might say ours is not so good, but this is what an economy is. A system for producing goods and services, distributing goods and services, and consuming goods and services. Next bullet. Labor union, group of workers that organized to bargain collectively for better wages and working conditions. I'm a member of a union. I'm a member of the teachers union. Your parents might be a member of a union. Many people are members of unions today. Industries, our next bullet, which is a specific branch of business that provides certain goods or services, like we are learning about the flour industry, the lumber industry, the iron mining industry. Those are the 3 main ones that we're studying in Minnesota right now at this time. And industrialization, that's the process of developing large mechanical factories. Minnesota is just starting to be industrialized. Before we started these things, we were not. We were just farming, and we didn't have factories and things going on, but it's starting now. Next slide. List at least 5 pieces of evidence that support the following statement. The working conditions and wages for miners like Anton Antilla were poor. Number 1, miners worked long hours. Number 2, miners were underground more than 10 hours a day. That's a long time to be underground working. Number 3, miners used dynamite, which was very dangerous. There were no regulations or safety things at all. It was so dangerous. Number 4, mine shafts were dangerous because they could collapse and fall in. Even today, that's dangerous today, working in a mine shaft, but back then it was even worse. Number 5, the rail cars could go out of control. Those were the little buckets on wheels, so to speak, that they would put all the iron in that would carry it up to out of the mine, and they could go out and you could get run over and killed. Very, very dangerous. Number 6, miners were not paid by the hour. In fact, if they didn't even bring up any iron, they didn't get paid. You could work all day and not make a penny. Very unfair. And number 7, the mine shafts were very dark and very dusty, a very unsafe place to work in. Next slide. How did the Middlings purifier improve flour? Well, before the Middlings purifier, flour had brown flecks of bran and all of this in it, and just wasn't that good for baking. When that was invented, it took out the brown flecks of bran and made a pure, fine, white flour, and women loved that. Next slide. What caused the lumber industry to decline in Minnesota? Well, we were cutting down so many trees so fast that the white pine forests were largely cut down, gone by 1905. Wow, we weren't practicing conservation yet. We were not replanting, and so that was really bad. Name two parts of a lumberjack's job that might have been enjoyable. Well, many men loved working outside. That was enjoyable. They liked that. Number two, you got to eat big meals working as a lumberjack. And number three, good wages. You could get paid pretty well being a lumberjack. And I know this isn't on the slide, but this was a great job for immigrants because you didn't have to know how to speak English to be a lumberjack. So it was really a great job to get. Next slide. Now we've talked about Anton Antilla in a previous slide. So this one says, although Anton Antilla's strike was not successful, later strikes across the country did make changes that improved working conditions. Name three. And that's right, his strike was not successful. And he was never allowed to work in the iron mines again. He was known as a troublemaker. But later on, some changes did get made from strikes. And one is an 8-hour workday. Not a 10-hour workday, not a 12, but an 8-hour workday. Number two, working only 5 days a week. Not 6 days a week, not 7 days a week. Number three, minimum wages were set by law. Remember, if you were an iron miner and you didn't bring up any iron, you didn't get paid. So now there were minimum wages, so you would get paid. Number four, we had child labor laws where a family couldn't send their child to the mines to work because that did happen, and that is way too dangerous for children. And also safe and clean workplaces for employees. Next slide. What were the natural resources, machines, and people that combined to make this industry, flour milling, grow in Minnesota? And as you can see in the test notes, I have them separated into natural resources, machines, and people. So the first bullet, natural resources, well, you've got to have rich soil to grow wheat, and that is what number one is. We had abundant, rich farmland for growing wheat. And number two, the water power of the Falls of St. Anthony to power the mills. Those are two natural resources you would have to go into the industry of flour milling, because if you can't grow wheat, you're not going to have a flour mill. And you had to have water power because we didn't have electricity to run these, and we had the Falls of St. Anthony to give the power. Machines. Well, we've already talked about one. The invention of the Middlings purifier took out all the brown flakes of bran, and it improved the quality of the flour. And another invention for flour milling, steel rollers, and they would ground the flour faster and finer, and women loved that, the fine flour. Now the people to work in all of this. Well, Minnesota was growing. We had an abundance of workers here. And an important person in the flour milling, Charles Pillsbury. And he was an industrialist. He was an owner, and he supplied the labor and money to get this industry going. And that's the end of our slideshow.